United States-born cardinal, 69-year-old Robert Prevost is now Pope Leo XIV, following his historic election on Thursday by a college of 133 cardinals convened in the conclave. Religious and political leaders have described the election of Pope Leo XIV as a profound moment for the Catholic Church and the global community. He has become the 267th occupant of the throne of St. Peter and the new spiritual leader for 1.4 billion Catholics around the world. The elevation of Prevost has also sparked discussion about what his tenure could mean for the Church's leadership on a host of issues, among them immigration, war, poverty, and inequality. To give us an understanding of the process and reaction, I'm joined now by Bishop Noel Rucastle. Bishop, good afternoon. Thank you for your time. Habemus Papam is the Latin expression that says we have a pope. Did you expect it to happen so quickly? The record is in recent years that it does take 2 or 3 days thereabouts. But against the backdrop of in the 19th century, if I'm not mistaken, where it took in the 14th century, where it took 3 years to elect a pope. Did you expect it to happen so soon?
Good afternoon to Lesizwe, and greetings from Oudtshoorn to you and the viewers. I did remark to some of the priests in the diocese, saying to them, I don't think this is going to be a long process, given the fact that everyone now is linked on social media. The cardinals had a week to be together prior, just between the funeral and the conclave gathering. So it wasn't a surprise. I fully expected it. My words were, by Friday, I'm sure we'll have our new Pope. But it is exciting, though. But
was this the name you had expected, though, Bishop? Because I'll tell you why I ask. Of all the names that I had heard being mentioned, and it's very hard to predict because, there's no such thing as a front runner to speak of. But you heard the name of the Secretary of State of the Vatican being mentioned, and the other cardinal that I had been watching closely that enjoyed quite a fair amount of reportage was the cardinal from Philippines, Cardinal Tagle. But did you expect this name to be the one? Because this is the first American Pope.
So if we have to go back 12 years ago to the election of Pope Francis, when they said Bergoglio has been elected Pope, all of us went, where is he from? So very often it is those that we don't expect. But I tell you one thing I have learned from this conclave, and if you read Leo XIV's CV and follow how his progression happened rapidly, well, in 20 years' time, when we have the election of another pope, or however long it takes, that's where I'll be focusing my attention to see who's been elevated and who's being promoted, because those will certainly be the candidates on the periphery, but nevertheless being carefully watched and marked as future leaders of the church.
So let's talk a bit about our expectations for his papacy. What does his election tell us about the direction in which the church is likely to go in the coming years? There was a lot said about Pope Francis as having been from the Jesuit order. Pope Leo is from the St. Augustine order, if I'm not mistaken. What does that tell us? The name that he has chosen, Leo, and his background in the work that he has done. What can we expect?
Okay, so I think what most importantly, we begin at the right when he stepped out onto the balcony and used those important words, peace be with you. It's significant because we live in a world where peace seems to be evading us. And so to hear those words from a leader, not only of 1.4 billion Catholics, but certainly of people around the world, to look at him as the Pope, as a shepherd, as a guide, as a vicar of Christ who will lead them, it is important that we say that's where it begins. But you're right to point out that he is an Augustinian. And so I went and did my research too. And if we take that word peace, the Augustinian congregation focuses their attention on unity, harmony, friendship, charity, and service. And if we think about it, none of those can really exist unless there is peace, because unity promotes peace. Harmony is the consequence thereof. Friendship promotes it. Charity promotes it. And service obviously promotes it and serves it too. So I think where we are going with Pope Leo XIV and the significance of his name, because I happen to read somewhere that when the world is in crisis, the name Leo always seems to surface. So in many ways, we are lacking peace. We are lacking hope, as Pope Francis declared this year, Jubilee year, where we are to be pilgrims of hope. And I think seeing Pope Leo XIV step out onto that balcony and say with conviction, "Peace be with you," it was a wonderful opportunity for all of us, and hence why the crowd went into that rapturous applause. It's a case of we have hope. We can look to the future, and we can look to the future together because we have a unifying leader who has everyone's intentions and good interests at heart.
Is he likely, though, to challenge the church in terms of reforms and perhaps reforms in the ways of understanding how various segments of our society fit in within the church, including those that have not always fit with traditional understandings of the doctrine? For example, so the LGBTQI community. Pope Francis made some statements there that I suppose years prior to Pope Francis would have not been so comfortable to hear from a pope. Is this that kind of a pope on issues such as migration, for example, and the wars that are raging, including the war in Gaza, in the way that Pope Francis had spoken about those issues?
So when we consider, as again I say, that word peace, I think what he really wants to be is a unifying factor. And so he'll draw our attention, global attention, to exactly that. If I may be permitted to do so, 58 years ago, another pope by the name of Paul VI, and he's very familiar to people who know about how progression happens, he penned a beautiful encyclical entitled Populorum Progressio. And these were the key areas that he focused on, and you'll see how I believe that Pope Leo XIV will be building on this for our future too. And this is what it says, that document, and I'll just bear with me for one small paragraph. The progressive development of peoples is an object of deep interest and concern to the Church. This is particularly true in the case of those peoples who are trying to escape the ravages of hunger, poverty, endemic disease, and ignorance, of those who are seeking a larger share in the benefits of civilization and a more active improvement of their human qualities, of those who are consciously striving for fuller growth. And as I say, 58 years ago, I believe we've come full circle again in the role of the Church and in the leadership that we have. Pope Francis began 6 years ago, and we'll have the next 3 years to follow, of the Synod on Solidarity, reminding us how important it is to listen to people, to listen to everyone, and using those beautiful words of Paul VI, those who are consciously striving for fuller growth. And I think that is all-inclusive, and I do believe that is where he's going to lead us. In terms of social teaching, and Catholic social teaching is very important when it helps us reflect on reading the signs of the times. And the signs of the times are where we are. Yesterday, when he delivered his first homily to the cardinals, he also spoke about the importance of faith. He mentioned it when he spoke about from the balcony, but he also mentioned it to them and saying how important faith is. And just to quote that beautiful text that we so very often hear at weddings and other celebrations, 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 13. There are three things that endure: faith, hope, and love. And the greatest of these is love. So a world that is focused on achieving that, I think, is where he wants to ultimately take us. That we can see the differences, work through them, but really listen to each other attentively, that everyone feels included.
Lastly, Bishop, it's inescapable that the conversation around Pope Leo XIV is being framed along the lines of, quote unquote, the first American Pope. And I saw someone correcting that he's not an American Pope, he is the Pope for everyone, for the globe, for the global Catholic community. But nevertheless, that lens of analysis continues. What do you make of that and the expectations of people? Some people immediately questioning, are we getting someone who will be towing the line and sort of, aligned on some issues with Donald Trump? Or are we looking at someone who, I heard somewhere that among the leaders of the church in the United States who from time to time would disagree with Pope Francis, he wasn't among those that would write to Pope Francis in disagreement on some issues. So I'm just wondering, his Americanness, does it matter at all?
Okay, so again, I think focusing on the Catholic social teaching of reading the signs of the times, I think Pope Leo XIV will ensure that he addresses those areas of concern. And being the vicar for Christ, being Peter for us, number 267, Peter who challenged people, Peter who was challenged by our Lord. And I think being a prophetic voice is really what we want from our shepherd, from our leader. So if the occasion lends itself, that he'll be willing to challenge and that he will not be afraid to do so.
All right, I've got to thank you for your time and your insights this afternoon. That's Bishop Noel Rucastle of the Southern African Catholics Bishops' Conference, reflecting there on the election of Pope Leo XIV.